사람은 역시 배워야 돼. 아는 것이 힘이다. 이런 이야기들을 어렸을 때부터 수도 없이 듣고 자랍니다. 이런 얘기들의 근간이 되는 믿음은 개개인의 머릿속에 있는 지식과 정보의 양을 늘리면 그 개인의 경쟁력도 상승할 뿐 아니라 배운 사람들이 많은 사회는 그 사회 전체도 발전할 것이다 라는 믿음이 있죠. 근데 제가 최근에 읽은 책에서 꼭 그렇지는 않다라는 얘기를 합니다. 바로 우리에게 사피엔스로 익숙한 유발 하라리 박사가 쓴 넥서스라는 책인데요. 이 책에서는 어떤 경우에는 정보의 양이 늘어나면 오히려 편견과 폭력, 파벌주의 같은 것이 더 증가할 수도 있다라고 얘기를 해요. 글자의 발명, 인쇄기의 발명, 공교육의 보편화, 라디오나 텔레비전의 보편화 같은 일이 일어났을 때마다 이 긍정적인 효과와 함께 부정적인 효과도 같이 왔다라는 놀라운 주장을 핍니다. 유발 하라리는 이 책에서 이런 새로운 관점을 가지고 역사 속에서 어떻게 종교가 탄생하고 발전해 왔는지, 국가라는 건 어떻게 만들어지고 발전해 왔는지, 공산주의와 파시즘과 민주주의의 정확한 차이가 무엇이고 비슷한 정보화 기술을 가지고 어떻게 그렇게까지 다른 체계들이 만들어질 수 있었는지에 대한 이야기를 하고요. 또 이런 역사적인 레슨을 기반으로 어떻게 우리가 SNS와 AI 시대를 살아가야 되고 정보와 지식이 범람하는 시대가 미래에 어떻게 발전할 수 있을지까지 이야기를 하는 책이었어요. 작년에 제가 이 책을 읽고 감명을 받아서 꼭 우리 탐구생활의 유발 하라리를 모시고 싶다는 생각을 했고요. 드디어 유발 하라리와의 라이브 인터뷰를 성사시켰습니다. 우리가 흔히 유럽 역사를 얘기할 때 암흑기라고 부르는 시기가 있습니다. 바로 중세기인데 우리의 머릿속에서 중세기에는 정보의 양이 적었기 때문에 좋지 않은 일들이 많이 일어났다라고 얘기를 합니다. 우리가 이 중세기에서 벗어날 수 있게 된 것은 인쇄술의 발전과 함께 사람들의 교육의 수준이 올라가면서 점차 유럽이 발전하게 되었고 르네상스, 과학혁명, 계몽주의를 통해서 이 발전된 사회의 모델이 되었다라는 것이 우리가 어렸을 때 배운 역사의 흐름이었습니다. 근데 유발 하라리는 이 이야기가 길게 보면은 맞다고도 할 수 있지만 좀 많은 디테일을 빼놓고 있다고 얘기를 해요. 일단 그 이야기로 오늘의 인터뷰를 열어보겠습니다. What we usually think of as the epitome of an illiterate society, which is witch hunt, actually didn't happen during what we call the Dark Ages.
Exactly.
It happened during the Renaissance that we look up to as sort of the gold standard of information society.
As you said, I mean, print is introduced to Europe from East Asia in the middle of the 15th century. 200 years pass until you have the flowering of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment with people like Newton and Leibniz and Descartes. What happens during these 200 years is that you have the worst wave of wars of religion in European history, and you have the worst wave of witch hunts. In the Middle Ages, Europeans didn't care much about witches. Sometimes they believe, yes, maybe there is some witch at the edge of the village, and if you want somebody to fall in love with you, so she can make you a love potion. She was not necessarily an evil. Then, around the invention of print, people came up with a conspiracy theory that says that actually all the witches in the world are connected in a conspiracy to destroy humanity under the leadership of Satan. This conspiracy theory gained a lot of supporters using print. One of the first big bestsellers in modern Europe was a witch hunting manual that told people about this conspiracy theory. It was called The Hammer of the Witches. To give just a flavor of what that book was like, there was a chapter in that book, The Hammer of the Witches, which discusses the ability of witches to steal penises from men. So, and it brings a very important subject, and it even brings all kinds of evidence. Author of the book, Heinrich Kramer, gathered from here and there. So Kramer tells in that book, for instance, about a man who wakes up one morning and discovers that his penis is gone. So he goes, it happens. So he goes, he immediately suspects the local witch. She must have done it. So he goes to the local witch and threatens her, give me back my penis. And the witch says, okay, don't get too angry. And she tells him, climb this tree. She takes him to a tree near her house. She tells him, climb this tree. He climbs the tree. At the top of the tree, he finds a nest, a bird's nest. But in the nest, instead of eggs, he finds lots of penises. The witch stole from different men in the village and around it. And the witch tells him, okay, you can take your own and go. So obviously he takes the biggest one. And the witch... And the witch tells him, no, you can't take this one. I know it's not yours. This one belongs to the parish priest. Now, we find it funny, but people took it seriously. They thought, yeah, I read it in a book. This must be real stuff. And the belief in this conspiracy of witches spread around Europe with the help of the printing press. And people believed it, and it resulted in tens of thousands of deaths. Because people would suspect somebody of being a witch and would torture them and execute them in the most terrible way possible. Maybe just one story about the European witch hunt. So in Munich, in Germany, people suspected the family of being a family of witches, and they took the mother and father and the three children and started interrogating them. And this book that I mentioned, The Hammer of the Witches, it not only exposed the conspiracy of witches, it also explained how to discover and interrogate witches, and it recommended torture.
Oh, so it was a torture manual as well.
It was also a torture manual. And you can still read the protocols of how they tortured this family, the Pappenheimer family, in the archives in Munich, in Germany. So you can read that there were like 2 parents and 3 kids. The youngest child was called, I think, Hans, and he was 10 years old. And you can read the inquisitor writing that we should start by torturing the child.
Oh, wow.
And they torture the child, 10-year-old boy, in really horrendous ways until he confesses that his mother is a witch. She had sex with Satan, that they fly around on broomsticks, that they cause diseases, that they kill people. And with this confession of the child, then they break the other family members, and then they execute all of them, including the 10-year-old boy, as witches. The book sounds very funny and hilarious, all this crazy nonsense, but people took it seriously, and it had far-reaching political and social repercussions. The witch hunt in Europe lasted more than 100 years, and it was fueled in part by the print.
And can you tell us a little bit about the life trajectory of this person, Kramer? Because I think he has a lot in common with some of these disenchanted young people in basement with a microphone who's lashing out at whatever group that he thinks he's being persecuted by.
At first, he did not have a lot of influence or a lot of power. He didn't invent the conspiracy theory. He came across it, he heard it from somebody else, and he became obsessed with it. And he started a witch hunt in a small town in what is today Austria, in the Alps, in Europe. But the local authorities, even the local church authority, the Catholic Church at the time, it thought that all these stories about witches, this is not Christianity. This is nonsense. So the authorities stopped him and expelled him from the town. And he felt humiliated by this authority. So he took revenge through the printing press, the same way that people today sometimes take revenge and express their resentment using the tools of social media. So he composed this crazy book, The Hammer of the Witches, printed it. And this is the key thing. Why would printers and booksellers cooperate with him? Because what they wanted is good business. Remembering this story about the witches that steal men's penises, you can understand why this book was very popular.
Yeah, it's just like good Twitter post that gets a lot of clicks.
Exactly. So, you have a bookstore in 1500 in Germany. On one shelf, you have this, I don't know, some book about
Copernicus
using mathematics to calculate how the different planets rotate. And you have this other book telling you these amazing stories about how witches have sex with Satan and kill children and steal penises from men. Obviously, people wanted to read the conspiracy theories. So the book became a very big bestseller. And the owners of printing presses and of bookshop, they made a lot of money by printing and selling this book. And Kramer, as a result, became very famous and influential. And eventually, even the church had to acknowledge his influence and power, and they appointed him a chief inquisitor of some of the areas in Europe, and then he could conduct his witch hunts with the support of the authorities.
유발 하라리에 의하면 정보라는 것은 낱개의 것을 모아서 뭔가의 구성 또는 조직을 만드는 요소를 얘기를 한대요. 사람들이 그냥 이 마을 저 마을에 흩어져 살던 원시 사회를 생각해보면 그거는 국가라고 부르기가 어렵죠. 언제부터 이 사람들이 국가가 되느냐? 모아서 공통적인 룰을 만들 때 국가가 되죠. 그 룰을 우리는 헌법이라고 하죠. 그래서 헌법이라는 정보가 공유돼야만 낱개로 흩어져 있는 사람들이 모여서 하나의 나라를 형성한다라고 볼 수가 있다는 거예요. 종교도 마찬가지로 낱개의 사람들이 흩어져서 각각 다른 것을 믿고 있을 때 우리가 종교단체라고 하지 않지만 사람들이 같은 성서를 읽고 그 성서의 내용을 진리라고 믿고 같이 모여서 실천하려고 할 때 우리는 그 사람들을 하나의 종교단체라고 불렀다는 거예요. 이렇게 정보가 곧 집단을 만들어내는 힘을 가지고 있기 때문에 이 정보가 전달되는 방식이 달라지면 당연히 이 집단의 생리도 바뀐다라고 유발 하라리는 얘기를 합니다.
I thought the most powerful idea from your book was that we shouldn't confuse information with truth. We thought that if we just increase the circulation of information, whether through education or podcasts, we are going to save people from bigotry and misinformation and hate, and the world would magically become better.
Yeah, I grew up in the same world.
And that was the driving idea behind the foundation of services like Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And with this increased information in last 20 years, what we've actually witnessed is that it's gone the other way. That we've seen more hatred, more bigotry, more sectarianism. And you say it's because that we fail to distinguish between information and truth. So 3 questions. 1, what is information? 2, how is information different from truth? And 3, why is it dangerous to confuse the two?
So maybe I start with the second question of the relations between truth and information. It's important to understand that most information isn't truth. Most information is fiction and fantasy and illusions and sometimes lies. The truth is a very small subset of all the information in the world. The truth has 3 problems. First of all, the truth is costly. If you want to write the truth about anything, history, economics, physics, you need to invest time and energy and resources to gather evidence, to analyze it, to fact check it, and it takes a lot of effort. It's costly. Whereas fiction and fantasy are very cheap. You just write anything you want. Secondly, the truth tends to be complicated because reality is complicated. And finally, the truth tends to be sometimes painful, unpleasant. There are many things people don't want to know about themselves or the world. Whereas fiction tends to be much more flattering and pleasant. So in a completely free market of information, the costly and complicated and painful truth is very likely to lose, to be flooded by enormous amounts of cheap and simple and flattering fiction. So this is why most information in the world is not the truth. What is information? In essence, information is not something that tries to represent reality. Information is anything that connects several people or several things into a network. And you can connect people also with fantasies or with lies.
I think that sums up this passage from your book that really sort of gave me shivers coming down my spine. You said, contrary to what the naive view of information says, and naive view of information, you mean confounding information with truth?
Yeah, thinking that all information is truth. The more information we have, the more truth we have. This is very naive.
Contrary to what the naive view of information says, information has no essential link to truth, and its role in history isn't to represent a pre-existing reality. Rather, it puts things in formation. Horoscopes put lovers in astrological formation, propaganda broadcasts put voters in political formations, and marching songs put soldiers in military formations.
The key thing to understand is that in history, unfortunately, power doesn't necessarily come from knowing the truth. Power comes from creating order and making a lot of people cooperate on a common project. If you think, for instance, about trying to create a nuclear bomb, what do you need in order to create a nuclear bomb? You need 2 things. On the one hand, you need to know some facts. You need to know the truth about nuclear physics. If you try to build a bomb and you ignore the facts of physics, the bomb will not explode. A single physicist, however smart she is, she can't build a bomb just by herself in her basement. You need millions of people to cooperate. You need people to mine uranium, and you need workers to build the reactor, and you need engineers and mathematicians, and you need farmers to grow rice and potatoes. So all these people have something to eat. Now, how do you make millions of people cooperate? Not necessarily by telling them the truth. If you just go around saying E equals mc squared, so now cooperate to build the bomb, nobody will do it. What you need to build the bomb is something more powerful. And what is this more powerful thing? Very often it's a fantasy, it's a fiction. And what we know from history is that when you try to build a bomb and you ignore the facts of physics, the bomb doesn't explode. But when you try to build an ideology or a religion and you ignore the facts, the ideology often explodes with a very big bang. People who know science, they almost always get their orders from experts in mythology or in ideology.
Which is the topic of the famous movie Oppenheimer.
Exactly. So you have the best physicists in the world working together to build the bomb. But once they have the bomb, so the representatives of the government come and say, thank you very much for building the nuclear bomb. Now we will decide what to do with it. And this is almost always the case in history. The people who understand how to control things get their orders from the people who understand how to control people. And to control people, you can be completely ignorant of the facts of physics and chemistry and history.
So if we go further back in history, you go back to the information revolution that took place before, which is the invention of writing.
Writing, yes.
And most of the time when you read in history books about the invention of writing, they say, okay, before people had to memorize everything, so there was a limited amount of information spread among the human race, but now we could put it somewhere, store it somewhere, so the amount of information just drastically exploded, and that was good for humanity. But you take a different twist at this development, and you say, in fact, before the invention of writing, the kind of information that existed was different than after the invention of writing. So before the invention of writing, you say in your book, because of the way our brain is structured, that we are good at memorizing stories, but we are not good at memorizing raw facts. Every information pretty much had to take the form of a story. But after the invention of writing, one of the first changes that happened was that people started compiling lists of what we might call database. And this had tremendous impact on the way human society developed afterwards.
What was the first writing? The idea was you take clay, which clay is basically just mud, and you take a stick and you make signs in the clay tablet, and then you can remember more information. So it was basically just a stick and mud, which was the basis for this information revolution. One of the biggest changes was that it enabled the creation of complicated taxation systems, without which kingdoms and empires were simply impossible. Before the invention of writing, we don't know of any large-scale political system. We have tribes, we have villages, we have small cities, but there are no kingdoms and empires. Because in order to have an empire, you need an army. And in order to have an army, you need to pay the soldiers. And in order to pay the soldiers, you need to raise taxes. Now, in a small village, you can quite easily remember who owns what and tax them. But in a big empire, how do you know who owns what? And how do you collect taxes from millions of people without writing? It was impossible. What writing really changed is the ability to build large taxation systems. And all the earliest writings we have, they are basically lists of property, who owns what, who owes what, who pay their taxes, the salaries of the officials, of the soldiers. So this relatively simple technology, just pieces of mud with signs on them, they were the basis for the first big kingdoms and empires in history.
유발 하라리는 우리가 정보라는 관점에서 역사를 다시 보기 시작하면 민주주의, 파시즘, 공산주의 같은 단어에 대해서도 더 정확하게 이해를 할 수 있다고 얘기를 합니다. 서로 다른 이념을 쫓고 있다고 주장을 하는 두 나라의 정치 체제가 의외로 비슷한 경우가 많습니다. 예를 들어서 히틀러의 파시스트 독일은 공산주의를 극도로 싫어했지만 스탈린의 공산주의 소련과 굉장히 많은 공통점을 가지고 있는 나라였어요. 정부에서 군사력을 증진시키는 방향으로 산업을 주도한다든지 사유재산의 보호가 없다든지 언론의 자유가 없다든지 이런 면에서 그들이 싫어하는 공산주의와 훨씬 더 비슷했지 영국과 미국 같은 다른 자본주의 체계를 가지고 있는 나라와는 굉장히 많은 차이점을 보이기도 했죠. 그래서 이런 이념적인 단어보다 실제로 어떤 정치체제가 어떻게 작동하는지를 보려면 유발 하라리는 정보의 처리 프로세스를 보면 된다고 얘기를 해요.
The basic question is, does the system assume it can make mistakes or not? Or that the key information on which the system is built, can it contain error or not? So religions usually assume that their key information is infallible. If you think, for instance, about the Bible, so in Judaism and Christianity, it is assumed that the Bible contains no mistakes, which is why there is no mechanism in Judaism or Christianity to change the text of the Bible. This is in contrast to secular and democratic societies that also have very important, even sacred texts on which they are based. These are called constitutions. But the assumption in a modern democracy is that the constitution might contain errors, so there are mechanisms to change it. For instance, the American Constitution, it includes a mechanism to amend the Constitution. So let's take a concrete example of slavery. Both the Ten Commandments in the Bible and the American Constitution originally endorsed slavery, said that it is okay for human beings to hold other human beings as slaves. If you look at the Ten Commandments, so commandment number 10 says that you should not covet your neighbor's field or your neighbor's house or your neighbor's slaves, which implies that in the view of God, who allegedly wrote the Ten Commandments, there is no problem with people holding slaves. God only becomes angry if you covet or steal the slaves of your neighbor. This is not good. And because the Ten Commandments assume that they were written by God and that the God can make no mistake, there is no way to change that people today can say, look, this is now the 21st century. We know it's wrong to hold slaves. So let's change the text of the Bible and delete this endorsement of slavery. It cannot be done. In contrast, the US Constitution, when it was written in the late 18th century, so in America it was legal to hold slaves. And the Constitution originally also endorsed slavery. But the Constitution has a mechanism. The people who wrote it, they knew that they are not perfect. Maybe we made some mistakes in the Constitution, so they included a mechanism to amend it, and eventually the American people amended the Constitution and banned slavery. Yeah, so if again we think about the Bible, so the Bible was written about 2,000 years ago. I mean, the Bible is not a single text. It's a collection of a lot of texts that were written over many centuries. But eventually they were compiled into a single text. But the world kept changing. So how do you interpret the text in a new historical situation? The text itself is silent. You cannot ask the Bible, what is the correct interpretation? And therefore a group of people emerges, like rabbis in Judaism or like priests in the church in Christianity, who hold power because they claim that they are experts in the text and they can interpret it correctly. The interesting thing is, by the way, that today with AI, for the first time, we have a text that can talk back to us. No rabbi is able to remember all the texts of Judaism. It's impossible for a human to do it, but AI can do it. So AI can now become the highest authority in religions like Judaism and Christianity, and can come up with new interpretations of the texts. So this is a difference between a system that considers itself infallible and a system that considers itself that maybe we make mistakes. This is also the key difference between dictatorships and democracies. In a dictatorship, the assumption usually is that the dictator is perfect. He is such a genius, he never makes any mistake. So there is no mechanism in a dictatorship how to stop or how to replace a dictator. The most essential feature of a democracy is the ability to say, hey, we made a mistake, let's try something else. Mechanism of elections is all about that. You vote for somebody, after 4 or 5 years, people can say, we made a mistake last time, let's try somebody else. In North Korea, you can't do that. So usually a democracy would also have a free press that is not under the control of the government and can identify, look, the government made a mistake, and there are free courts that can block a move by the government if it is illegal, or they can judge the government if there is corruption. So democracy is all about this assumption that even the most powerful people are not perfect. They might make mistakes. So we need mechanisms to identify and correct these mistakes.
One of the scariest part of your book is large-scale totalitarianism was impossible before the invention of modern information technology. So, for example, even if Rome was a very sort of stifling totalitarian empire, because Roman emperor couldn't know what a Germanic tribe was doing on the border of Rhine, so he was relatively free to live according to his ways. Whereas in Soviet Union, because of the wash of paperwork that goes back and forth between the local bureaus and the Politburo committee and everything, they could control more in detail what every person was doing. And then you say, because AI doesn't need to sleep, eat, or take a break, if AI gets combined with like totalitarian state control system, then we are going to have like a real dystopia. And that seems to keep you up at night.
Briefly, there is a difference between authoritarian regime and totalitarian regime. Authoritarian regime is when all political power is in the hands of one person, like an emperor or king, and you cannot get rid of that person and you cannot correct their mistakes. But still, because of limited information, they cannot really control what every person in the kingdom or empire is doing every day because they don't know. This is authoritarian regime. Totalitarian regime is when there is enough information in the center that the center can control the daily life of every individual. So in the Roman Empire, for instance, you cannot get rid of the emperor. You cannot overcome the decision of the emperor, but the emperor doesn't know what somebody is doing in a distant village, so you mostly live your life as you wish, and the emperor cannot control it. When modern information technology came, like print and then telephone and radio and all that, suddenly totalitarian systems also became possible, because it was possible to get a lot of information about the life of every individual to the center. But still, with 20th century technology, there was a limit even to totalitarian systems like the Soviet Union. For instance, you couldn't really monitor every Soviet citizen 24 hours a day. There are 200 million Soviet citizens. If you want to follow all of them all the day, you need 200 million KGB agents. And the Soviets didn't have 200 million agents.
And if they had 200 million agents, who are going to watch the 200 million agents?
So you need agents to watch the agents. And also, let's say that an agent has followed me all day and he writes a paper report. Oh, he went there, he met this person, he read this book. This is just paper. He needs to send this paper report to headquarters in Moscow. And this is, again, like the DDoS attack. So think about KGB headquarters in Moscow. Every day, they get 200 million reports about every citizen. Nobody can read all that. Nobody can analyze all that. Most of it is just, gathering dust in the archive. So because of that, they couldn't actually follow everybody all the time. AI solves this totalitarian problem. Today, if some dictator wants to establish totalitarian regime, they don't need millions of agents to follow everybody around. They can just use the smartphones, the computers, the cameras, microphones, drones, which are everywhere, to follow everybody 24 hours a day. And they don't need human analysts to analyze this ocean of information and make sense of it. They use AI. So for the first time in human history, it's possible to create total surveillance regimes regimes that monitor everybody all the time and that completely annihilate privacy. And this is one of the most frightening scenarios.
That brings me to the next question. In your book, because of the rise of AI, you worry a lot about what you call centralized information network as opposed to distributed network. Big distinction you make between different types of network is between centralized networks and distributed networks. Can you introduce us what's the difference
Yes.
between the two and also what are the advantages and disadvantages of each?
And if you look at countries from outer space, let's say you're an alien, you don't know anything about human ideology, you don't know anything about democracy, dictatorship, you just watch from your spaceship. And what you can see on Earth is simply the movement of information. You, let's say, watch the Korean Peninsula. So you will see that in the northern part of the peninsula, all the information goes to one place, and then the orders go from that place everywhere else. So very clearly, this is a centralized information system, and this is the hallmark of a dictatorship. If you look at the southern part of the peninsula, you will see, yes, there is a center. A lot of information goes there, but it's not all the information. Actually, a lot of the information goes between different cities and towns and organizations and never passes through the center. This is the characteristic of a democratic, distributed information system in which a lot of organizations and individuals have some power to make decisions by themselves. So the information is distributed, is decentralized. A decentralized network has a lot of advantages. In a distributed system, even if the center makes mistakes, a lot of the decisions are made elsewhere. So we see, for instance, that in the economy, free market so far worked much, much better than the attempt to centrally plan every single thing in the economy. One of the best ways to assess systems is to see not what people say with their mouth, but how they vote with their legs. I have a friend, he's from India, and he's quite old now, he's in his 80s, and he was a sailor in a ship during the Cold War. And this was in 1960s, 1970s. Everybody was arguing about capitalism and communism, which is the best system. And he told me, as a sailor, I had a very easy test which system is better. Every time my ship docked in a capitalist port, like in the United States or Australia, the authority was so concerned that somebody from the ship might try to steal into the port, like an illegal immigrant.
Yeah.
Every time we docked in a communist port, like in Leningrad or someplace in the Soviet Union, the authorities were so concerned that somebody from the city will try to get into the ship. And then I knew capitalism works better. And you look at today, where do the waves of immigrants are going to? They mostly still go, people complain about the European countries and about the United States. There is trash in the street and nothing works. And you have millions of people who want to go there.
So far, I also had this feeling when I was reading your book. I'm like, oh, we are all doomed. It's going to be Black Mirror. Like, I literally had image of me being chased by, do you know the dog? The
dogs,
robot
yes.
dog? That looks like the Boston Dynamics. When you talk about the relentless of robot surveillance, I literally had the image of me running from that dog. And then recently I saw a video of Russian autonomous drones
Doing exactly that.
Yeah, chasing Ukrainian trucks down the road. I'm like, oh my God, it's come true.
It's come true.
So what hope can you offer me? I'll take anything.
Yes. So first of all, history is never deterministic. You always have choices to make. I tend to focus on the more dangerous scenarios simply because there are enough people who tell the public about the positive scenarios. All the companies and the entrepreneurs that develop AI, they naturally tell you about the positive potential. It will create better medicine, better education, it will help deal with climate change, and all this is true. But it's my job as a historian, as a philosopher, to also say, okay, but there are also dangerous scenarios. Now, these scenarios are not prophecies. This is not inevitable. We have a choice. Like in the 20th century, like you look at the last couple of decades. So for instance, you look at North Korea and South Korea. They have exactly the same technology. They have electricity in North Korea, they have internet in North Korea, they have telephones in North Korea. They just chose to do something different with this technology than people in South Korea. So the same technology can be used to create totalitarian dystopia and a liberal democracy. The same thing is true of the technology we are developing right now. AI and algorithms and social media, they have very dangerous potential, they have very positive potential. It's our decision, at least for a few more years, what will be done with them. And the reason I wrote the book, I wrote Nexus, simply in order to empower people, that people will understand the AI revolution and will be able to join the debate about what to do with the technology. And if enough people understand both the dangers and the opportunities and make the right decisions, then I think that there is a good chance that the societies of the future will be much, much better than the societies of the present.
Whew. Thank you very much.
오늘은 우리가 잘 알고 있는 사피엔스, 호모데우스, 넥서스 등의 저자인 유발 하라리 박사의 원래 전공 분야인 중세 역사에 대해서도 재미있는 얘기를 많이 나눠봤고요. 또 이 중세 역사가 우리에게 가르쳐 줄 수 있는 여러 가지 미래에 대한 이야기에 대해서도 얘기를 나눠봤습니다. 오늘 조승연의 탐구생활은 여기서 마무리하고요. 다음번엔 더 재밌는 문화 역사 이야기로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 안녕히 계십시오.